Alright, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a trip back to the golden definitive era of rock and roll. We're gonna uncover the absolutely incredible story of a brilliant musical legend, a guy who literally shaped the biggest hits of the time, yet somehow got almost zero credit for it. You know, when we think of the 60s and 70s, we usually picture these massive personalities and global superstars, right? Well, today, we're looking at the actual architect of rock himself, Leon Russell. It's this wild story of immense talent hidden just out of sight, and honestly, it's gonna completely change how you listen to some of your all-time favorite classic tracks. Let's dive in.
Think about the dynamic of the music industry back then. On one side, you had these highly visible frontmen, the absolute icons of the era. The whole world worshipped bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan. They were the faces plastered on the magazines, the ones being chased down the street by screaming fans. But hidden in the shadows, that was our invisible architect, Leon Russell. While those massive stars were soaking up the limelight and the adoration of millions, this one man was working quietly and tirelessly behind the curtain. He was the guy actually sitting at the piano, writing the complex arrangements, and essentially crafting the very sound of the era, all without the fame.
Section 1. The Wrecking Crew Weapon. So rather than aggressively chasing the spotlight for himself, Leon Russell became the industry's ultimate secret weapon. He was born in Lawton, Oklahoma in 1942, and man, he didn't wait around to kickstart his career. By the time he was just 14 years old, he was literally lying about his age to sneak into local bars and nightclubs, just playing the piano for hours on end. Jumping forward to his 20s, he lands in Los Angeles, the absolute beating heart of the music business. And it was here that he fell in with a loose, highly secretive collective of incredibly skilled session musicians known as the Wrecking Crew. These guys were like the ghosts in the machine. They were quietly playing the instruments on nearly every single hit record coming out of LA. Leon quickly became one of their sharpest assets. In fact, there is a very, very good chance the tracks he played on are sitting in your Spotify or Apple Music playlists right now.
To give you a concrete idea of his hidden impact, let's just focus on the Byrds' legendary version of Mr. Tambourine Man. Did you know that if you listen closely to that track, there's a jangling, hypnotic piano line running right underneath the guitars? Well, that entire piano line is 100% Leon Russell's work. It absolutely makes the song. But here's the catch. It was an entirely uncredited contribution. His name was left completely off the record sleeve. No way, right? He created the magical hook that tied the whole room together, but he remained entirely invisible to the record-buying public.
Section 2. Building the Wall of Sound.
Moving into the mid-1960s, Leon's behind-the-scenes genius caught the attention of the legendary and famously eccentric producer Phil Spector. Now at the time, Spector was building his famous wall of sound. You know the one, those massive, echoing music productions built for hit records by artists like the Ronettes and the Righteous Brothers. It was a totally revolutionary approach to pop music, creating this dense, layered, overwhelming wall of instrumentation. But Spector had a major problem. He had this massive, chaotic vision swirling around in his head, but he desperately needed someone who could actually translate that musical chaos into structured sheet music that his session players could actually read and perform in the studio. Enter Leon Russell. Leon Russell was one of the very few arrangers out there capable of taking Phil Spector's chaotic genius and turning it into something real and functional. He could make sense of the madness, translating it into actual sheet music. He arranged these massive studio sessions that eventually became some of the most influential recordings in all of pop history. Leon was the vital bridge between a wild, untamed concept in a producer's mind and a tangible, playable masterpiece. But as we just saw with his work with the Byrds, a familiar and honestly unfortunate pattern emerged. Because Spector's immense ego demanded that the spotlight stay entirely on himself, Leon's name stayed completely off the credits. This dynamic kicked off a really frustrating two-decade pattern in his career. Leon built the musical architecture, but someone else's name went on the front door. It's like he was the master builder, the foundational genius, whose signature was constantly erased from the blueprints before the public ever got a chance to see them.
Section 3. Hits for everyone else.
Okay, so by 1969, Leon transitioned from simply arranging other people's music into writing his own original songs. And the results? Absolutely staggering. He wrote massive foundational tracks like Delta Lady, A Song for You, and This Masquerade. I mean, these are iconic pieces of music. But it was superstars like Ray Charles, the Carpenters, and George Benson who took those exact songs, turned them into global hits, and built massive careers off them. They took Leon's breathtaking work to the very top of the charts, while Leon himself remained a name that only music industry insiders actually recognized. To really put the sheer scale of his unsung genius into perspective, consider this.
His timeless track, A Song for You, hasn't just been covered once or twice. It has been recorded by other artists over 100 times. Just let that sink in for a second. 100 times. Think about the immense cultural impact of a single piece of music being reinterpreted, rearranged, and re-recorded over 100 times by totally different musicians across entirely different eras of music.
And this leads us to a reality that is both fascinating and, honestly, a little heartbreaking. Most people out there humming along to A Song for You, and we're talking about millions of them, have absolutely no idea who actually wrote it. Millions of people all over the world have fallen deeply in love with everyone else's version of this masterpiece, completely oblivious to the man who actually sat down at a piano and poured his heart into creating it in the first place. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to really reflect on. Is it better to be recognized in the spotlight or to create art so timeless that the world simply absorbs it? Like, is it ultimately better to have the fame, the magazine covers, and the explicit credit? Or is it better to do the quiet, incredibly hard work of creating a permanent piece of our culture, even if your name never makes it onto the front door? It's a profound question about the true nature of art, ego, and legacy. Thank you so much for joining me to uncover the incredible story of the invisible architect of rock, Leon Russell.
I grew up listening to so many different piano players, starting with Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis, Fats Domino, Floyd Kramer, going through the whole roster till suddenly in the late 60s, I heard a record by Delaney and Bonnie. And I thought, wow, this guy who plays on this record, he's got everything I like. He's got soul and gospel and kind of bluegrass and everything going. And then I went to see Delaney and Bonnie in England, and I saw him, and he looked like something from outer space. He was pretty amazing. But then he did the Joe Cocker Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and then he really looked like something from outer space. He became the master of space and time, and he wore that hat and those aviator glasses, and he looked like a mean motherfucker. I met him after the show. And not only was he sweet and kind, he gave me a recipe for my voice, which I still use to this day. And he asked me to do some dates with him. And listen, he was my idol. To meet him, I was shaking. For me, he sang, he wrote, and he played just how I wanted to do it. Only recently have I discovered how many people's records he played on. Leon played on Bing Crosby, Johnny Mathis, Doris Day, Dean Martin, Herb Alpert, Frank Sinatra, Strangers in the Night. Remember that? The Ventures, the Everly Brothers, Del Shannon, Dwayne Eddy, Bobby V, Bobby Darin, Jan and Dean, Let There Be Drums, Sandy Nelson, that was Leon. The Fleetwoods, Come Softly to Me, that was Leon. Connie Francis, the Crystals, the Ronettes, every Phil Spector record. The Byrds, Mr. Tambourine Man. Delaney and Bonnie, the Beach Boys, every Beach Boys record, including Pet Sounds. J.J. Cale, Harry Nilsson, Bob Dylan, Joe Cocker, Freddie King, and B.B. King, just to name some of them that he played on.
Like I have to say, if you leave this place tonight and you don't feel like you had a religious experience, why don't you just get your money back? Because I don't need it.